What's going on, partners? Today I'm going to take you down a trip down memory lane and share with you my experience in Guantanamo Bay in 2005 to 2006. But before we get started, I'm going to bring you up to date on what had occurred prior to me getting there in the spring of 2005.
On October 7, 2001, Bush announced the first strike in Afghanistan. The first year of the Afghanistan war resulted in a lot of prisoners, with the first 20 detainees being brought to Guantanamo on January 11, 2002. Between 2002 and 2003, the majority of Gitmo inmates would be brought to the detention center, with the camp population peaking in May 2003 with 680 active detainees. The number of new detainees brought to Gitmo dropped dramatically in 2004, with none added in 2005 and only a couple in 2006 and 2007. In 2005, after leaked reports of abuse at Guantanamo and photographs of abuse of prisoners by American soldiers in Iraq at the Abu Ghraib prison, Congress responded by passing the Detainee Treatment Act. The measure banned cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of prisoners while in military custody. However, despite this, President Bush, after signing it into law, stated he'd defy the law if it was deemed necessary and inconsistent with his constitutionality as the president.
There you have it, partners. We arrived at Guantanamo Bay in 2005 when all these things were going on. Abu Ghraib photographs had been leaked early on in the year. In addition to that, the inmates were hunger striking. A hunger strike that was intended to bring media attention and publicity to the inhumane treatment that they were experiencing in Guantanamo Bay. Shortly after our arrival, the black site that was used to interrogate them got closed down and was no longer in operations. While my time there, I didn't really see any inhumane treatment towards the detainees. It was the other way around. There was inhumane treatment towards the sailors and soldiers that were in charge of security in the camp. I witnessed inmates spit and gas sailors. I myself, while working the towers, would get harassed. They would yell things like, "Fuck you, America," "Death to America." And I would just sit there and ignore them, pretend I couldn't hear them, and enjoy the beautiful weather that Guantanamo Bay had to offer. While I was stationed there, I did get briefed that these hunger strikes were not anything new. And actually, the inmates had begun a hunger strike as soon as they got there in 2002. They would attempt to do mass suicides with these hunger strikes. They would even go as far as eating the bottom of the fences. While we were there, we did do some force feeding, which is what you hear a lot about the news, and they claim that it's inhumane treatment and it's torture. But it's a very difficult situation. Do we let them starve? Do we let them die? Is that humane, or do we force feed them? Now, the force feeding was a little brutal. It involved them being placed in a restraint chair and a feeding tube being shoved up their nose while a liquid substance would get pumped into their stomach. Then they had to sit there for about 15 minutes to let the liquid digest because if they would pull out the tube out of their nose, it would trigger their gag reflex and they would throw up. Not only were they protesting the long-term isolation, but they were also not getting a trial. So they were there indefinitely without ever being charged of a crime. In 2005, we also held commissions. These commissions were intended to review the cases of the inmates to see if they were even going to provide them with a trial. A lot of the other complaints seem very minor to me. It was things like their Bible being mistreated or their properties and belongings being tossed into the floor. In my opinion, was very minimal because when you go in for a cell search, you're going to drop things, blowing these out of proportion. Now, I'm also not a religious person, and I think that the treatment of the Quran that the inmates claim is not sufficient and cannot be justified as torture. I get that these guys are very religious, but from my perspective, it just seemed very minor to the actions that they were taking against the staff. You also hear a lot about the force feeding being inhumane, but what you don't hear about is the anal hydration. That's right, anal hydrations. But you'll never hear the detainees say that that was inhumane. I'm just saying. Now, bringing it back to the hunger strike. In 2006, I was briefed that these hunger strikes were spreading, and inmates in California had been participating in a hunger strike in 2002, along with the first detainees that arrived at Guantanamo Bay. Fast forward almost 20 years later, and as I'm conducting my investigation in the increasing violence inside county jails, my research takes me to 2012, where inmates in the California Department of Corrections at Pelican Bay began a hunger strike. Now, I knew that in 2002, the media was trying to get into Guantanamo Bay, but the government at the time did a very good job of keeping them away. In fact, the Associated Press, unfortunately, in 2005, while I was there, they did let the media in and they did get access to the inmates, and that's where a lot of the mistreatment claims came from. Interestingly enough, in 2002, the inmates in California were also trying to get the media involved to get them to spread the propaganda that they were also being mistreated and they were being labeled gang members through a faulty gang validation system. This is why I decided to look into the 2012 Pelican Bay hunger strike to see what were really the intentions of the inmates. Were they really trying to bring awareness to human rights issues and mistreatment? Because since 2012, our inmate population has decreased, yet the violence inside our detention centers has increased. The hunger strike was just a ruse. It was a way to get the media to manipulate the public and letting these inmates out of the SHU to assert dominance over our detention system. And this is evident and obvious with the amount of drugs that are coming in presently, by the amount of murders that are being committed, and by the increase in violence. For now, partners, that is all I got. Remember to hold the line and let's hold them accountable.